end of March 1944, the French Expeditionary Corps was relocated from high points north of Cassino that it had captured in January and February to positions along the Garigliano River. It was being prepared to play a critical role in Operation Diadem, a massive assault on the Gustav Line to take place in mid-May. Their journey to Italy began on the 3rd of September 1939, when France declared war against Germany following its invasion of Poland 2 days earlier. On the 10th of May 1940, the German army began the invasion of France through the Netherlands, Belgium and Luxembourg. On the 18th of May, First World War hero General Philippe Pétain was appointed Deputy Prime Minister to bolster French army morale. But the will to resist quickly crumbled. The British army retreated and most of it was evacuated from France by the 4th of June. On the 13th of June, the French government fled to Bordeaux, and the following day the German army occupied Paris. On the 17th of June, Paul Reynaud resigned as Prime Minister. Pétain replaced him with the mandate to end the war. Some called for France to fight on. On the 18th of June, Charles de Gaulle, who had been appointed Brigadier General earlier in the month and appointed to the French cabinet in a junior position, was in London for talks with the British. He was allowed to deliver a broadcast on the BBC calling for France to resist. In a second broadcast the next day, de Gaulle declared that the armistice he knew was soon to be signed with the Germans was illegal and that the French government would commit treason by signing it. The warning fell on deaf ears. France and Germany signed an armistice in Compania on the 22nd of June 1940. It provided for the occupation of 60% of French territory. Paris was obliged to pay Berlin occupation costs. An unoccupied region in the south was left relatively free to be governed by a rump French administration based in Vichy, which also had administrative duties in all occupied zones other than Alsace-Lorraine under severe restrictions. Both France and Germany thought the occupation would be a provisional state of affairs that would last until Britain came to terms with Berlin. About a third of the 1.5 million French servicemen taken prisoner were released or exchanged for forced labor by the end of the war. But around 1 million were imprisoned for the entire conflict. The ceasefire went into effect on the 25th of June 1940 after an armistice was signed between France and Italy, which had occupied southeast France. Pétain became leader of a regime based in Vichy on the 10th of July. It declared itself to be France's government. De Gaulle was tried in absentia and sentenced to death for treason, but he regarded himself as the last remaining member of the legitimate Reynaud government and declared Pétain's assumption of power to be an unconstitutional coup d'etat. France was crippled, yet it was still a global power with a fleet and an empire with armed forces. The largest number were in French North Africa, comprising Algeria, which was then part of metropolitan France, and the protectorates of Morocco and Tunisia. French West Africa, which now comprises 8 countries, also remained under Vichy French control, as did French Indochina, now Cambodia, Laos and Vietnam. But in French Equatorial Africa, what are now Chad, the Central African Republic, and Congo-Brazzaville, defected to the Free French immediately after the armistice. British and Commonwealth forces occupied what is now Lebanon and Syria and installed a Free French regime. And Madagascar was captured in November 1942. London refused to recognise Pétain's government and supported the creation of a Free French army in the UK under de Gaulle. But a few of the 150,000 French military who had escaped initially pledged their support. By the end of July 1940, only about 7,000 soldiers had joined the Free French Army. Three-quarters of French servicemen in Britain requested repatriation. Anti-British sentiment in France, caused by the evacuation of the British Army in June, escalated following the Royal Navy's destruction of the French fleet in Mers el-Khabir in Algeria on the 3rd of July, with the death of 1,297 French sailors. But work continued on building an alternative to the Vichy regime. On the 27th of October 1940, de Gaulle announced in Brazzaville, in French Congo, the creation of the Empire Defense Council to administer imperial possessions under Free French rule. The council was replaced on the 24th of September 1941 by the UK-based French National Committee, with de Gaulle as president, which was to act as the French government in exile. It was recognized by London, but not by the US, which had diplomatic relations with Pepin's regime. Everything changed following Operation Torch, the Anglo-American landings in Morocco and Algeria on the 8th of November 1942. London and Washington planned to establish a General Giraud, who had escaped from prison and fled to Vichy France, as commander of French forces in North Africa, which were wrongly expected to capitulate as soon as the landings started. French resistance only ended on the 10th of November, when Commander-in-Chief of French Armed Forces Admiral Jean Dalin, who was in Algiers when talks started, ordered French forces to join the Allies in a deal that involved him being recognized as High Commissioner of France in Africa. Dalin was assassinated on the 24th of December and replaced by Giraud. Hopes that Tunis would be captured by the end of 1942 were dashed by Axis resistance. UK Prime Minister Winston Churchill and US President Roosevelt met in Casablanca in January 1943 to agree strategy. They improved the invasion of Sicily once Tunis had fallen, which was expected in May. They were joined by de Gaulle and Giraud, and they were all photographed together. France now had a government recognized by both America and by Britain, with the manpower to form an army. In May, de Gaulle moved from London to Algiers, where Giraud was already based. The army was mainly created from formations already in North Africa, the Foreign Legion of Foreign Mercenaries and the Armée d'Afrique. This was a lightly equipped 130,000-man force comprising local volunteers and conscripts, which had been permitted under the 1940 armistice with Germany for local defense. Roosevelt and Giraud agreed in Casablanca that it was to be expanded to 8 infantry and 3 armored divisions organized and equipped to US Army standards. The Premier Corps de Debarquement was formed in Algeria in July 1943. The following month, it was divided into 2. The part designated for Italy comprised the 2nd Moroccan and the 3rd Algerian infantry divisions, supplemented by support units, and around 8,000 Moroccan Tabors formations recruited in the Riff mountains. They were known as Goumiers, after the Arabic word for nation. On the 18th of November 1943, the force destined for Italy was redesignated as the Première Armée Française, or Armée A, under General Joanne. Born in Algeria in 1888, Joanne had been wounded in his right arm in the First World War, which made it impossible for him to salute with it. He had been released from a German prison camp in June 1941, transferred to North Africa the following month, and became commander of French forces there in November. At Dalin's request, Joanne had negotiated the ceasefire in Algiers on the 10th of November and ordered French forces to resist the Germans and the Italians. He was given command of French forces in Tunisia under the First Army, led by General Anderson. Juin was promoted to General d'Armée and made a resident general in Tunisia following the fall of Tunis, where he stood on the greeting stand for the victory parade through the city on the 20th of May 1943. To restore French power, Juin deposed the Bey of Tunisia, Mohammed VII, on what are now known to be trumped-up charges of collaboration. Pétain stripped Juin of his French nationality as punishment for collaboration with the Allies. In July 1943, Supreme Allied Commander in the Mediterranean Theatre of Operations, General Dwight Eisenhower, raised with Juin the possibility of French troops being used in the Italian campaign. He accepted on behalf of Giraud, who was then in Washington, D.C. Juin was placed in charge of a force which was intended to grow into an army headquarters. In Italy, it was to be part of the Fifth Army. On the 3rd of January 1944, Juin's force became operational as the Corps Expeditionary Français, and he took a reduction in rank to General de Corps d'Armée under command of the more junior General Mark Clark. The Moroccan division, commanded by General André Dodi, landed in Italy first and was initially placed under Major General John Lucas's 6th Corps. The 3rd Algerian Infantry Division, led by General Joseph de Gouala de Montsaber, included 3 regiments of Algerian riflemen and 1 of Tunisian. The 4th Moroccan Mountain Division was under General François Zévez, and the reserve force of Moroccans and French North African settlers was commanded by General Augustin Guillaume. On the 7th and 8th of December 1943, the Moroccan division relieved the US 34 Division north of San Pietro Infine, and it captured the 4,000-foot Monte Pantano north of Venafro 9 days later. This encouraged Clark to make further use of French troops in mountain fighting. On the 3rd of January 1944, the French relieved the whole of 6th Corps and took over command of both the Moroccan division and the US 45th Division in the mountains west of Venafro. They were soon joined by the 3rd Algerian Division. On the 12th of January 1944, the Corps led an attack against the Gustav Line to stop the Germans from transferring troops to Anzio, draw additional forces to the line and break it, and link up in due course with the Anzio bridgehead. Its objective was high ground north and northwest of Cassino. By the end of the 15th of January, the Algerian and Moroccan divisions had advanced to the upper reaches of the Rapido, captured more than a dozen peaks of up to 4,000 feet, and inflicted heavy casualties on the German 5th Mountain Division. On the 21st of January, the 2 divisions attacked again to capture high ground overlooking Atina. After breaking into the Gustav Line north of the Rapido, they were redirected on the night of the 24th of January to focus on the 2,000-foot Monte Belvedere and the 3,000-foot Monte Abate. By the 1st of February 1944, the Corps had punched a hole in the Gustav Line, and in 10 days of combat, high points were repetitively captured, lost, and then regained. The Algerian division, including the 4th Tunisian Tirailleurs, which captured Belvedere on the 25th, losing 2/3 of its men in the process, suffered more than 2,000 casualties. The Corps was ordered to suspend offensive operations, but by now it was seen as a key element of Allied plans for the Italian campaign and was to be part of the invasion of southern France scheduled for the summer of 1944. Among the men in the Corps decorated for bravery was Ahmed Ben Bella of the 5th Moroccan Infantry Regiment. He dragged a wounded officer to safety and assumed command of his battalion. For this, Ben Bella was promoted to the rank of warrant officer and received the Médaille Militaire, the highest decoration of the Free French Forces, directly from Charles de Gaulle. After the war, he was a leader of the Algerian independence movement and became Prime Minister and, in 1963, the first President of the Republic of Algeria. On the 28th of March, the French Expeditionary Corps was relocated to take over positions along the Garigliano. They extended around 10 miles from Castelforte along the Garigliano to its junction with the Liri. They were overlooked by the Monte Maio Massif, part of the Oran Mountains, which rose to more than 3,000 feet. That day, Clark was visited by Joanne in the company of Giraud, who presented a plan for the Corps to attack during Diadem to capture high points north of the river. On the 9th of April, Giraud was replaced as Commander-in-Chief of the French Army by de Gaulle. This set the scene for the confirmation on the 25th of April of the Corps' key role in Diadem. On the 12th of April, Royal Irish Fusiliers Captain Lawrence Franklin Vale wrote to his wife Olive in the UK from the front line close to Cara, north of Cassino. I am writing this letter in a small dugout on the side of a mountain. There is very little room to move around, but it has been made fairly snug by hanging blankets around the sides and over the entrance, while the roof is covered with logs. This afternoon it poured with rain, and after a time the water started to drip through the roof, and we were threatened with disaster. I write by the aid of a hurricane lamp beside me, and my torch shining down from the roof. Outside is the constant sound of machine gun fire, and at the moment someone is firing Tommy guns some distance away, and our mortars are firing. Every now and again comes the crump of German mortars, and then perhaps a short spell of silence. Just as I wrote this, there was a tremendous burst of machine gun fire on our left and the crash of mortars on the right. More machine gun fire has just started, and also the rain, which is more annoying to us at the moment than the machine gun fire. Everything is having a go at the moment, but this incidentally is a normal, uneventful night in the line, and no special attack is occurring. It is just what happens every night. I have not had a letter from you, darling, since the one dated the 30th of March. I am very much hoping one will be up with the rations tonight. All my love to you and Valerie, sweetheart. Don't worry. Write often. Lawrence.